go. Good morning, everybody. I am Sharon Whitehill, your worship associate this morning at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Charlotte County. This service is being broadcast live via YouTube, and it will be available later. For that and our technology support in general, I have great thanks to give to Corey and Tom and Sue and Sharon G. And for our music today, I'm grateful to Linda and Jim and members of the Uufcc choir. So with that gratitude out of the way, I want to cover a few of housekeeping issues with you that I'm sure you know by heart, but I will make them brief. First of all, to respect and protect everyone's privacy, we use first names only and, where necessary, last initials. If you've joined us from home, you might want to have a chalice or a candle available and ready for our chalice lighting ritual. At the end of the service, we socialize on the patio, so please leave by those doors on my right if you're able. And from the reopening committee, I must remind you, I see everybody is being very dutiful with their masks on, which is what we are being requested to do, wearing a mask, even outdoors, if you are closer than 6 feet apart. There's a little game you can play. If you want to take your mask off and talk to somebody face to face without a mask, you put out your hands, and they put out their hands, and you're 6 feet apart. So, with that, I will ask Corey to load up the prelude for the morning. We welcome all of you to our service here at Uufcc, especially if you're searching for a spiritual home. Most of us were once in that position too, seeking something larger to be part of, looking for a sense of rootedness to hold us close as we create meaning together. So whether it's your first time here with us or your 500th time, we hope and trust you'll find people to befriend, ideas that stretch you, and liberal spiritual values to share in with us. Loving bravely, living justly, and offering welcome to everyone. I don't believe there are any new folks today, but if there are, if you're comfortable doing so, just raise your hand, wave at us, and let us know you're here. After the service, you can email Mary Jane, our administrative assistant. I mustn't say secretary anymore. She can be reached at office@uufcc.org. You can visit our website at uufcc.org. But no matter your choice of how you connect with us, we are glad you have chosen to spend your Sunday morning here. If you are watching from home at this moment, please have a candle available to light when John lights our fellowship chalice. In this dual symbol of the chalice, the flaming chalice, we see both the chalice and the flame. The chalice is a cup of generosity and community and sustenance. The flame is the light of hope, of courage, and of wisdom. Together they represent our aspirations, lighting the way and illuminating our hopes for the future, even in these darkened times. So now, as John lights the chalice for us, please join me in reciting our affirmation. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our aspiration: to dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to help one another. Now we will hear our choir's recorded rendition of Spirit of Life with lovely images to accompany it. Our opening words today are from a longtime favorite novelist of mine, Tony Hillerman. If you like mysteries and Navajo culture out in the Four Corners of Arizona, you may also appreciate Tony Hillerman with me. These words are from his novel, The Ghost Way. Everything is connected. The wing of the corn beetle affects the direction of the wind, the way the sand drifts, the way the light reflects in the eyes of each person beholding reality. All is a part of totality. And in this totality, each person finds ho, which means balance and measure. Each person finds ho, a way of walking in harmony with beauty all around. Our tradition here at Uufcc is to share our joys and sorrows and life milestones by entering them into a book of life, also known as the Red Book, which you can find at the back of the sanctuary to your right as you enter. And when you arrive on Sunday morning, if you come, you may enter your joy or sorrow or milestone in that Red Book. If you are at home, you can also email your items to bookoflife@uufcc.org, and I or whoever's worship associate will enter them after the service into this book. Thank you, Cheryl, for bringing me the book. I received nothing on bookoflife.org today, but let us see what we have in the book itself. Let's see. Today, May 25th, correct? Yeah. One loses track of time. This one does. All right. I have two joys from Sandy Tillander. Did I say that correctly, Sandy? Yes? No? Mark Ellefson left yesterday on his motorcycle trip to Minnesota. We wish him a safe journey. That's joy number one. And joy number two from Sandy. I'm sorry, I said her last name, I just realized. Sandy is very happy to be assistant to Mary Jane in the office. And I know for a fact, I know that Mary Jane is happy too. She's extremely happy, Sandy. May we hold these milestones and one another in love and tenderness, in the strength and comfort of our fellowship in the days and weeks ahead. Our speaker today is Dennis Shaw, whom we all know and love. But before he steps up here, there are certain things about him, all of them germane to his presentation this morning, that will put that presentation in context for you. One is that Dennis holds master's degrees in both child development and special education, and a doctorate in curriculum development for children with severe communication disorders. He did all that graduate work at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro, and after that, he spent over 30 years directing developmental centers for preschool children with developmental delays. And, as if that weren't enough, creating demonstration classrooms in public schools for students with severe communication challenges. These were students from elementary schools through high schools. And his classrooms served as hands-on training sites for college and graduate students who were seeking their own credentials in special education. As if that's not enough, Dennis was also an adjunct assistant professor at North Carolina's A&T State University, where he spent the summer of 2004 teaching Lithuanian teachers how to diagnose and teach children with autism. He published 5 curricula in the field and trained teachers across North Carolina on working with them. All of this informs Dennis's sermon today and will make sense of his title, which is changed somewhat from what we read in the weekly notes, which you all read, I'm sure. He has changed that title to this more, I would say, vivid one. It is called Hearing the Call in Spillcorn. I assume Spillcorn is a place. We will find out. Dennis?
I always feel so good when I take the mask off without removing my hearing aids. If you came or tuned in this morning expecting to hear a sermon, you might be disappointed. I'm not much of a preacher, but I love to tell stories. So in place of a sermon, I'm going to share a story on our continuing theme of nurturing beauty. The story is set in 1972, 50 years ago, in a tiny community in the mountains of western North Carolina. The theme is how I was able to nurture and be nurtured in a place that was completely foreign to me, and in the process, find a new direction and purpose. As far back as I can remember, the folks in my family, in my church, in my community, thought that I would become a Christian, preferably Presbyterian minister. As a child, I loved going to church. I paid attention in Sunday school, couldn't wait for summer Bible school to begin. I read a chapter from the Old and New Testaments every night and never forgot to say my evening prayers. I blessed everybody I knew on my pathway to sleep. I also sang solos in the church children's choir and always conducted the funerals for the dead animals that my brothers and playmates discovered on our acreage on Patterson Hill. As a Boy Scout, I earned the prestigious God and Country Award. After the service in which I received this award, my mother, being careful not to crush her corsage, embraced me with tears and whispered, "I think you've been called to the ministry." So it wasn't a great surprise that after earning a bachelor's degree with a concentration in religious studies from Warren Wilson College in 1971, I chose to enroll with a full scholarship at Princeton Theological Seminary. The surprise was that I hated seminary. The first semester, my course load consisted of ancient Hebrew, ancient Greek, homiletics, which is a course on sermon writing, and courses on both Old and New Testaments. I don't think I've ever been so conflicted, disappointed, and frankly bored. So much to the shock and disappointment of my parents and previous mentors, after one semester I left Princeton and returned to the mountains of western North Carolina, where I had attended college, and there I started looking for work. I thought about returning to the Head Start Center, where I had taught 4-year-olds for one semester prior to entering Princeton. I loved being with young children and was obviously a natural teacher. However, at the time, there were no positions available, so out of financial necessity, I took a job in a factory that made cans that would eventually contain vegetables. About a month after I started working on the assembly line, I received a call from the director of the Head Start program. Her name was Leslie. Over lunch the following day, she described an itinerant Head Start position in neighboring Madison County. Since the first priority of Head Start was children's health, the primary challenge was to locate the preschoolers that lived in a rural community northeast of the little town of Marshall. Once found, these children and their families would be referred to the recently established medical clinic for free immunizations and medical care. Additionally, the employee would distribute educational toys and materials. She summarized the job description by stating that a local woman had already been hired to serve as an assistant and guide, and the position would start the beginning of March and last until the end of November. She emphasized that the project had been more than adequately funded with federal dollars for at least the first year. Leslie concluded by stating that she thought that I was the perfect candidate for the position, and that in addition to a modest salary, I would be paid round-trip mileage from Asheville. By the time dessert arrived, I accepted. The next week, I completed the necessary paperwork, bought a 1967 light blue Volkswagen Squareback, a pair of leather hiking boots, a backpack, and a detailed map of Madison County. On the first Monday of March, 1972, accompanied by Leslie, who thought she could remember how to get there, I made my first hour and 15-minute trip between Asheville and Spilcorn. Initially, I followed the banks of the French Broad River and then climbed and descended a steep mountain via Bear Branch Road. When we passed the town of Marshall on Big Laurel Road, I started searching for a directional sign to Spilcorn, but there wasn't one. I returned twice to the same filling station for directions, and on my third attempt, I finally found the turn. The entry was hidden by trees and the road was unpaved. For the last 20 minutes of our journey, Leslie and I bounced over washboard ruts as I wondered how many trips my used squareback would endure. Finally, the road forked, and I was directed to take the lower path, which dead-ended at the foot of a mountain, a steep mountain. Halfway down the dead end was a graveled area in front of a small block building that served as a home and a general store. The owner, Rance, operated the only business in Spilcorn. He was also the only resident that had the luxury of electricity and a telephone. Rance's granddaughter, Audrey, had been hired as my guide. Even before I could park my VW, the screen door swung open and a young woman with bright red curls skipped to the passenger window, and in a deep drawl, she blurted, "Miss Leslie, I am so happy to see you. I can hardly believe this is really happening." And as I climbed out of the car thinking exactly what Audrey had just voiced, Rance approached and offered his hand with this greeting. "I'm sure glad you finally got here, Head Start teacher. This child's been worrying me to death." And so the adventure of a lifetime began. On my second trip to Spilcorn, a solo drive, I became aware of the hushed, foggy stillness in the river valley and the spectacular vista along the mountain ridges. My new green polyester jacket provided warmth despite temperatures hovering in the upper 30s. The world held a clear promise of spring. When I arrived at Rance's store, Audrey had already accomplished our first objective. She had created a list of all preschool children in the area. There were 18. Literally, Audrey knew everyone. The convergence of the upper and lower roads in Spilcorn was referred to as the dam, despite the absence of any structural interference with the flow of the wide Spilcorn Creek. The valley below the non-existent dam belonged to Audrey's family. The 4-mile road above the dam, also a dead end, led to the homesteads of the majority of the other Spilcorn residents. Their homes were typically built on mountainsides across from the road from the creek, thus saving the structures from the annual spring floods. The typical dwelling was constructed of wood, tar paper, and corrugated tin, and featured ground-level living space and elevated sleeping lofts. Everyone had a wood stove for cooking and heat, a well or a spring, and typically an outhouse. I spent my first full day in Spilcorn being introduced as the Head Start teacher to 7 women and 16 young children who all lived within reasonable hiking distance from the pull-offs on the side of the road. Overall, despite Audrey's bubbling enthusiasm, my reception was cool, even dismissive. And according to Audrey's list, I only had 1 more mother and 2 children to meet. Late that afternoon, as I drove south along the mountain ridges, the shadows cast across the valley floors appeared dark and ominous. Suddenly, homiletics in ancient Greek didn't seem so boring. On my second full day in Spilcorn, Audrey and I hiked up a long, narrow path that began on her grandfather's property at the end of the lower road. Later, I referred to the path as the Trail to Tennessee. We climbed for what seemed miles before Audrey suggested we take a break and have a chat. She confessed that when making her list of mothers and children, she wanted to be thorough, so she included the family that we would hopefully meet. But she was having second thoughts. The first problem was she wasn't sure that this family actually lived in Madison County, or even North Carolina for that matter. It was very likely that we were crossing into Yancey County, or possibly Tennessee. The second concern related to the fact that the young father of the boy and girl was away without official leave from the United States Army. I responded to this news by asking her if she felt endangered. "Oh, not at all," she immediately replied. "It's you I'm worried about. But as long as you stay close, I doubt he'll shoot you." Suddenly, ancient Hebrew sounded fascinating. When we finally arrived at the cabin that was either in North Carolina or Tennessee, we were greeted by a young woman standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. A very young girl was hiding behind her stretched out apron, and a younger boy was peeping through the hole created between her elbow and waist. Standing at least 6 feet behind Audrey, I listened as she explained our presence on their property and the medical and educational benefits of that the Head Start teacher could offer her children. The mother's response was immediate and very clear. "No, we ain't interested. Go away and don't come back." On the long hike down the mountain, I thought about how I had put both Audrey and myself in danger and began to harbor serious doubts that I could accomplish anything of value in this isolated and even primitive place. When we returned to the store, I used Rance's phone to call Leslie at the Head Start office and arranged a meeting for the next morning. Then I asked Audrey to spend the next day revisiting all the folks we had met above the dam. I asked her to get the birth dates of each child and make sure to mention that I love celebrating with rose-covered birthday cakes from a special bakery in Asheville. Finally, I asked her to strongly encourage the kids' mothers to take advantage of this great opportunity for medical care. She agreed. The next day in Leslie's office, I expressed my disappointment with the cool to negative reception I had received in Spilcorn. I openly wondered what I was doing wrong. She immediately reminded me that I had spent a total of 2 days in the community and had yet to meet the staff at the clinic in Hot Springs. After a brief call, she told me to get out my map, drive to Hot Springs, and introduce myself to the clinic staff. Route 63 to Hot Springs took me northwest of Marshall through the tiny villages of Lester and Sandy Mush, Lock Truss, Spring Creek, and Bluff. The winding mountain road provided spectacular views, and by the time I reached Hot Springs an hour and a half after leaving Asheville, I felt like I had been on a mini vacation. Hot Springs, home to about 500 inhabitants, is located at the confluence of the French Broad River and Spring Creek, and was settled by Europeans several hundred years ago. Its name and fame is based on the existence of a natural hot spring that made it a destination for thousands seeking therapeutic relief from a long list of ailments. In 1972, at the height of the Vietnam War, Hot Springs also became home for several young professional men who were conscientious objectors. The physician that headed up the Hot Springs Medical Clinic, Dr. Jim, was there to fulfill his CO service. The clinic was housed in a 2-story clapboard house located on Hill Street. In addition to Dr. Jim and his wife Becky, a registered nurse, staff members included John, a pharmacist and also a conscientious objector, his partner Brenda, a licensed social worker, and Ruth, a native Madison County woman who served as the administrator, the receptionist, the public relations director, and she scheduled all the appointments. Ruth greeted me when I walked through the door. She already knew who I was and why I was there. During the rest of the day at the clinic and over lunch between patients, I had lengthy conversations with the staff and was welcomed into a world of common values and purposes. By the time I turned the square back towards Asheville, a workable plan for Spilcorn had been developed, and I had been invited to the weekly Friday night mountain music jams on the spacious lawn of Hot Springs' ancient matriarch, Mrs. Maudie Long. These gatherings were initiated by David Holt, who was on assignment from the Smithsonian Institute gathering the music and stories of the mountains. David later hosted numerous PBS and NPR programs, played for 14 years with Doc Watson, released 22 albums, and won numerous Grammy and Emmy Awards. These Friday nights on Maudie's lawn literally captured my soul. When I returned to Spilcorn, I was enthusiastic, energized, and very hopeful. This state was further elevated when Audrey reported that all the mothers living above the dam had agreed to enroll their preschool children in Head Start. Upon questioning her regarding the tactics she used to change their minds, she relayed three things. First, everyone was enthralled with the idea of a rose-covered birthday cake from a special bakery in Asheville. Secondly, she pointed out that if they didn't participate, she would lose her precious job. And finally, she confessed that Rance agreed to eliminate half of their current charges at his store if they participated. Within a week, under the direction of Rance and half dozen volunteer fathers, the clinic's large white tent was erected in the field between Rance's store and the trail to Tennessee. During that beautiful spring morning, 16 young children received their first immunizations and medical checkups by Dr. Jim and Nurse Becky. Just outside the tent's exit flap, special guest Leslie served large slices of rose-covered layer cake from that special bakery in Asheville. During the next several months, I made weekly visits to each participating family's home and introduced the children to crayons, watercolors, puppets, puzzles, and various other educational toys. My schedule also included numerous trips with mothers and their children to the Hot Springs Clinic for wellness checks, ear infections, strep throat, and even pneumonia. During the clinic visits, the mothers had opportunities to discuss their needs and challenges with the clinic's social worker, Brenda. She concluded that the most common problems these women faced were rooted in their isolation. Based on this information, I decided to provide monthly field trips. I never asked Becky where the money came from for these extravagant adventures, but she always funded my requests. On an unusually hot summer day, all the children and their mothers boarded two borrowed 16-passenger vans, and we traveled to Asheville, where we lunched at McDonald's, followed by a matinee movie, Disney's The Aristocrats. These were amazing first-time experiences. As summer waned, it occurred to me that barefoot children would soon need shoes and warm coats. With donations and financial gifts from friends and an Asheville church, I was able to acquire these necessities. One of the unique features of the Volkswagen Squareback is its flat pancake rear engine. The design provides storage room under the hood and behind the back seats. So I packed my supplies under the hood and displayed the shoes and clothing in the rear. During the day, I left the hatch open so folks could shop in privacy and at their leisure. At the end of each day, the rear of the car was always filled with fresh vegetables, berries, home canned preserves. On one occasion, I discovered 2 trout swimming in circles in a bucket on the front passenger floor. In early September, I began to hear rumors that Head Start would create a center where the children could gather throughout the week. Consistently, the mothers talked about how wonderful it would be when Spilcorn had its little schoolhouse. Finally, I confronted Audrey, asking her where these rumors had originated. I was shocked when she placed the blame firmly on Rance. The next day, Rance told me about a small building he owned along Spilcorn Creek. Initially, it had been a large one-room shingled house. It belonged in his family, but had been empty since a particularly rainy spring a few years earlier that had produced dangerous floods. Its last occupants had been chickens. He reckoned that it might be renovated without a lot of money and, of course, volunteer labor. As Rance and I walked to the empty house, he said, "I'd be happy to rent to the Head Start program for $1 a month." Then he continued, "Of course, I wouldn't charge anything the months the program wasn't using it." I immediately returned to Asheville and shared this offer with Becky, and the next day she accompanied me to Spilcorn to assess the idea. Within a week, she had acquired enough money to replace the roof, flooring, and install drywall. As soon as what Rance considered unnecessary permits were required, materials started arriving, and the men of Spilcorn under Rance's supervision got busy. As the reconstruction began, I designed a classroom that featured lots of shelving and hinged drop tables. At my weekly meeting with Leslie, I shared my design and discussed the availability of basic classroom furniture. At our next meeting, Leslie returned my design with the addition of a screen porch and a tiny bathroom. She had arranged for the installation of a septic tank and the extension of the power line that previously ended at Rance's home and store. So, on a sunny mid-October morning, surrounded by mountains in their brightest fall glory, the Head Start Center in Spilcorn, North Carolina, was officially opened with a formal ceremony and party. There were numerous special guests, including the mayor of Asheville, county commissioners, the regional Head Start director, a reporter and cameraman from the Asheville Citizen-Times, the staff of the Hot Springs Clinic, and even a state congressman. During a formal address by Leslie, she dedicated the center in honor of Rance. She also announced that since we were unable to pass the necessary health department requirements to cook meals, she had hired a local woman, Lenora, to drive 5 days a week to Marshall to pick up and deliver the children's lunches. Then, hand in hand, Audrey and I cut the yellow ribbon that was stretched across the door and invited our special guests and beloved community members to explore the little building and then exit off the screen porch where a delicious potluck lunch would be served. Then David Holt and friends filled the air with guitar, fiddle, and banjo tunes that had been recently rediscovered in the surrounding mountains. While holding a plate piled high with baked chicken, collard greens, and corn, I overheard the reporter from the Citizen-Times interview one of my students. When asked what he was looking forward to in his new school, without hesitation, the boy replied, "Pooping in a real toilet." The next 6 weeks passed too quickly. And on my last day in Spilcorn, Leslie, Audrey, and the children's parents surprised me with a party which featured a very large layer cake covered in frosted roses. As I drove away from Spilcorn down that rutted washboard road for the last time, I sobbed. What an amazing gift the last 9 months had been. and what deep grief I felt leaving this beautiful community in which I had successfully been able to nurture and had been nurtured in return. My experiences in Stillcorn changed my life, providing the courage, faith, and desire to create and follow my dreams. For the first time since I left Princeton, I experienced a deep sense of self-worth. As my faithful squareback climbed the mountain on Bear Branch Road, I realized that I had been called. I pulled over to the side and walked to the edge of the ridge. There, I was overwhelmed by a stunning early winter vista lit by the setting sun. Without hesitation, I cupped my hands around my mouth and at the top of my lungs yelled, "Yes! Blessed be."
A remarkable and inspiring story, Dennis. I feel privileged to have heard you this morning. We'll now have the Corn Choir, Uufcc, recorded "This Little Light of Mine." We know that our beloved congregations exist because of your generous support, your awareness of the privilege and responsibility we share to make sure it endures. Your pledge or donation may also be offered online. And be sure that any other donation, such as our second helping, is indicated as such on the check's memo line. If you are with us for the first time, please do not feel obligated to give this morning. This once allow us to make you our guest. Life of the community. It's that time again. And it is the time that we highlight UUFCC's special events and activities. These are also listed in Mary Jane's weekly updates. You know how I feel about the failure to read the updates. I will scold any of you who don't read them. It's the very best way to stay connected and to stay abreast of our ongoing activities here. There's a full calendar for the week, all the links you need for connecting through Zoom, highlights to be read aloud at the service. Everything's there. And the frosting and sprinkles and rose-colored frosting decorations on the cake are Mary Jane's ever-amusing and often confessional musings. You won't want to miss those. So mail your announcements to bookoflife@uufcc.org. Today, we have the following. First of all, this is a reminder that this Saturday at 2 o'clock, Saturday, June 4th at 2 o'clock, our celebration of life for our dear friend and longtime member, Marilyn Reeve. So I hope to see you all there, and others as well. Secondly, we are still short the pledges of numerous members, and this is concerning. Please, if you haven't already mailed in your pledge, do your part. Somewhere in those weekly updates I mentioned, that I nag you to read every Sunday that I can, you will be able to find a hint to the new scavenger hunt game, which Mary Jane offers with a weekly prize. What you have to do is somewhere in those weekly updates, it means you have to read them all, there will be a clue, a hint, and it will take you to a specific treasure found on the UUFCC website. So you get to read both the weekly updates and get to know the website thoroughly and win a prize. Do you think we are desperate to get you to read these things? Moreover, you can now listen to the weekly updates, being read to you by our own Herb Levin, he of the soothing and mellow baritone voice. And finally, Reverend Kathy will be holding another Zoom workshop on communication. She's calling it Communication 2. It will deal with, it will be a continuation of Communication Workshop number 1, and it will deal with handling conflict. This will be on Thursday, June 9th from 10 to 11:15. It would be thoughtful of you to let her know that you plan to attend. Keep watching the updates for reminders, lest you forget. Our closing words for this morning take the form of a beautiful poem. It's a poem that was beloved to me ever since I first read it in high school by the American poet Sarah Teasdale. Notice, as I read these words, that they have been set to music and are in our own hymnal as hymn number 329. Sarah Teasdale's poem is entitled Barter. Life has a loveliness to sell, all beautiful and splendid things, blue waves whitened at a cliff, soaring fire that sways and sings, and children's faces looking up, holding wonder like a cup. Life has a loveliness to sell, music like a curve of gold, scent of pine trees in the rain, eyes that love you, arms that hold, and for your spirit's still delight, holy thoughts that start the night. Spend all you have for loveliness. Buy it and never count the cost. For one white singing hour of peace, count many a year of strife well lost. And for a breath of ecstasy, give all you have been or could be. I believe I have memorized that poem. Please join me now in a ritual recitation as John extinguishes the chalice. After this is done, we'll hear Go Now in Peace, and you are invited to stay for our social time outdoors on the patio. Remember to exit by this door unless you have difficulty with the step. And be sure to wear your masks outside unless you stand 6 feet apart. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of hope, or the fire of commitment, or the warmth of community. May those ideals shine in our lives and warm our hearts until we are together again. Go now in peace.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the Spirit of God surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the Spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere.